Hello, my name is Autumn Jimenez, and I have the honor of interviewing Janie Martinez, and I get to learn a little bit about her testimony, her favorite verse, and her favorite hymn, and I'm very excited. So, Janie, tell me how you came to know the Lord.
Well, first of all, I was a World War II baby, born and raised predominantly in Pensacola, Florida. My dad was Navy, so other than a few years when we were at different stations where he was assigned, I grew up in Pensacola, Florida. But I did have the blessing of growing up in a Christian home. And the thing about that is singing Jesus Loves Me, knowing that God is love, learning to speak, to recite John 3:16, all of those things came from the time I could talk. Mm-hmm. And learning right from wrong, that was a way of life at our house. So as far as thinking about where I was at that point, very young, and growing into that, I think so many of us who have that kind of experience, we think we don't have as dramatic a story to tell as somebody who's had that total turn from one to the other. And because we learn to live the Christian life before we make that decision. So we don't, even though there is a turn, it's not as dramatic sometimes to people. But Sundays you didn't question going to church. At that time, I know you can't believe it at this point, but nothing was open on Sundays, nothing, not even a grocery store. So everything was closed. So we went to church, we went to my grandparents' home, aunts, uncles, cousins, and then we went back to church in the evening for Bible study and the evening service. And that was just how it was. And again, taught to live the Christian life long before I accepted Christ and made a commitment. But when I think about sometimes we don't think ours is dramatic, I think we do have a special gift because we're the ones who will see the incredible ways that our life has been patterned out without us thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And things are woven and they're arranged and we progress on our journey with the Lord. And we're the ones who can look back and we can see the reasons for why we had some detours. We all have detours. Oh, yeah. But we're the ones also who can look back and say, wow, boy, the Lord knew what he was doing then, even though I didn't. And as far as him setting up the opportunities in our lives. But when I was 7 years old, my grandmother from Oregon came to spend a few months with us. She was kind of a hard woman, but she was a gifted musician, and she would sit at our old upright piano and play, and her favorite song was Safe Am I, and I learned to sing that with her, but she just seemed to have such an assurance about it that I knew that there was something special in her relationship with the Lord. And as far as growing into that, I think she really dealt with me more than I realized at the time, because we did have some time alone. And I think she had, even though she was a hard woman and she'd been hard on my mother, I know, and she'd had a hard life, but I think maybe I had a special place in her heart. And a few months later, during an evening service at our church, I did make the decision to go forward. But I have to say that the Warrington Baptist Church was very small, and there was only a middle aisle. The pews were pushed up all the way to the wall. And I was sitting on the far end by the wall. That's crazy. It was. So at the time, the pastor, I don't remember everything he was preaching about. Again, I was young, but I remember when he got to a point of talking about how even our little lies are just as bad as the big lies. And I thought, my little stories are an affront to, I didn't use that word, I was an affront to Christ, and I began to tear up, and I asked Jesus to forgive me. But I was on this end by the wall, and everybody was standing up singing Probably Just As I Am, because that was pretty much the invitation hymn for most of the time. But I got up on the pew I trotted along behind all those people, jumped off into the aisle, and went up to the pastor and said that I had Jesus in my heart. And I remember that he did ask my parents afterwards if they were all right with this, because I was young, and I was baptized just not that long afterwards. But that's like a video in my mind. It's I can still see it. I know what I was wearing. I knew who I was sitting with. All of that is very, very vivid. And that was just a special time. And it's one of those things that, even though I was young, as you grow in physical maturity, emotional maturity, educationally wise and everything, I think it's a constant rededication over and over and over, because you understand more and you realize more with each step in your life. And I think that continues with us for as long as we can. But the main thing is, I've looked back now and I say, Jesus was the master designer of my life. I've seen why he put me in places over the years that I didn't understand at the time, but looking back on it, I know he was the master designer.
So when was the time you saw God work in your life?
When I think about that, I think about the phrase, what a coincidence. How often do we say this? And we say something's a coincidence, and we say it without much thought or anything. But the timing of two things coming together in a strange way, we just kind of brush it away sometimes, and we don't really stop and think about it. But sometimes we might have a wow moment a little later and say, oh, I remembered this 2 days ago. And then, so that's what was happening. And then give it a bit more thought after something like that. But sometimes we might even brush it away, but it pops up again sometimes, and we get this memory again. And as a child of God, I have decided that there are no such thing as coincidences in our lives. And he's in control of our steps. He's in control of everything we're doing and of our moments. So at the end of 1979, my husband accepted the call from Emmanuel Baptist Church in Highland to come as their minister of music. And we had been, for 2.5 years, we'd been in Anchorage, Alaska, where he'd been doing music and youth. And at that time, he did make the decision to come, but I didn't want to yank the kids out of school again. And so we decided that the kids and I would stay, 4 children. The kids and I would stay and come at the end of May. I took them out of school in the middle of May, actually a week early out of school, and that he would go on in January. But I would never advise anybody to do that again. At any rate, I loved my life in Alaska. It was the first time all the kids had a room of their own. We had a family room. I had a little corner of that room that I could use for my little art studio. And it was the only year that all 4 kids were in one school. And the bus stop was in front of our house.
Oh, that's nice, yeah.
so it was like perfect. And each of us, I think we all were enjoying it. And a little further along, I worked for the Alaska Baptist Family Service Center, which had a children's home and counseling services, and I loved that. I left the Northern Lights. I would stand on the second story looking out the window in the middle of the night at the Northern Lights, and they were so beautiful. I just loved them. I loved life there. Yeah. But in mid-May, just as to show one way of recognizing things in our lives, we barged the car to Seattle. The kids and I flew from Anchorage to Seattle, picked up the car, and we started on our drive, and already made arrangements to spend time with family and friends along the way. My mother was from Oregon, so I had relatives there. And we stopped in Clatskanie, Oregon, which nobody knows where that is. There might be somebody that does, but very few do. And my aunt and uncle had a farm there, a dairy farm. So we stopped there for a couple of days, and then drove into Beaverton, which is outside of Portland, to stay with some longtime friends. And woke up the next morning to the news that Mount St. Helens had erupted. And we looked outside, and we're looking at the coverage on TV. all of the ash, all of the smoke, everything's billowing into the sky. And watching the coverage, I saw also that so much, the ice melted, the debris was coming down, and so much was destroyed. And that was including the highway that the kids and I had come down the day before.
Oh my.
So this was, it took me a little while to kind of realize this, but I began to process some of that, the timing, and again, not a coincidence. I saw this as a message from the Lord that chapter Alaska was over, and that he had something else. He had something with a big bang. Something else was in store for us. Now, the Lord did not give me the volcano.
Yeah.
It was not for me, but he knew that I was going to be there at that time, that I needed some affirmation of what was going on. So when you find, I call it tweaks in your timeline, people in your path, and detours in your destination, but there's time you need to stop and let the eyes of your heart examine some of this and see what's going on with you, because it's not just a coincidence, it's providence.
What is your favorite verse and why?
Well, it is actually one that we've already used, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. At the age of 16, at a summer youth camp, I dedicated my life to Christian service. I really felt the Lord had something for me. Didn't know what the specific path was at that time. But when I made that public, everyone said, Janie's going to be a missionary. I said, I don't think so. I wasn't feeling that. But I was open to whatever. And whatever the direction was God was going to lead me, I was willing. I was just making myself available. And I think that's so important for us to be available. And the same year, it was the summer before my senior year in high school, and I had applied for a job as what was called the Bluebirds that worked at the Baptist Hospital there in Pensacola for the summer. There was a little nominal pay for it, but not that much. But it was kind of like the candy stripers here.
Wear a cute outfit.
Right. And you follow the nurses around, that kind of thing. Cool. But I didn't get the job, and I was crushed. And I did not understand that, because I'd been in the Future Nurses Club, I'd been working at the hospital on Saturdays, and I thought, so, but there was also, my dad decided my mom should go home to Oregon. She hadn't been home in about, 10 or 12 years. So back to Oregon. And my brothers and I would go with her. And my dad, we had a family business. My dad would stay and run the business. And I said, I'll stay, Daddy. I'll stay and help you run the business. No, you're going with your mom. Well, that wasn't too good either, because at that time, I wasn't getting along with my mom real well. The 16 thing is kind of happening. Yep. And again, this was another tweak in my timeline. I thought I had it all laid out. On the way to Oregon, we went by California. We stopped in Escondido because I had an uncle who was stationed there at Miramar, and so stayed with them for the weekend. And from the time we got there, my cousins, my 10-year-old cousin especially, started telling me about this person named Danny. Danny this, Danny that. Well, I wasn't interested. I'd just broken up with a boyfriend too, so I wasn't interested. And even my aunt got into the discussion. I just said, okay. But on Sunday morning, we went to their church, the Broadway Baptist Church in Escondido, and I was just jolted at this young man came bouncing out on the podium, on the platform, to lead the doxology with more enthusiasm than I'd ever seen, and so I did take notice. The rest of the song service was very uplifting, very energetic, and that was the day I met the young man I would marry a few years later. So it became apparent over the next few years that all the things that I had planned, I had considered nursing, I had considered medical technology, archaeology. I still love the archaeology, watch all the programs. Really cool, graphic artist. These were all things that I was just scratch. This wasn't going. But they did all fit into a teaching career.
Oh, yeah.
And as I realized that Danny and I were progressing towards marriage, I said, yeah, but somebody in the ministry, you kind of have to have what we called portable careers for women. And back at that time, there was like nursing, teaching, secretary. You know, there wasn't as much as what you can do now.
Yeah.
But God had woven together all the pieces, and I was able to finish my college at Florida State during the time that, because he got drafted during the time that he was taking care of his service obligation. We got married right after that. But again, detours, more detours. Detours in your destination, the people in your path, and the tweaks in your timeline. All of those things happen. So,
What is your favorite hymn and why?
very difficult after all the years of being married to a man in the music ministry and all the changes that have happened in music over the years and everything. Very difficult, but I still go back to, I have this music library housed in my brain, and but I still go back, and nearly every day, I think, I at least sing this, the refrain from this song, He Lives. And the story behind it, I think, is really very important, too, for today with what's going on in the world and this country too. But it was written by Alfred Ackley, who was a teacher. And one day a young Jewish student asked the question, "Why should I worship a dead Jew?" And Ackley said, "But he lives. I tell you, he's not dead. He lives here and now. Jesus Christ is more alive today than ever before, and I can prove it by my own experience as well as by my testimony of countless thousands." And actually, he talked to the man further after class, and afterward he went home to reread all the stories of the resurrection from the Gospels. And as he went through that, these words just kept coming over again. He is risen, he is risen, he is risen. And it suddenly struck him with a whole new meaning. And the scriptural evidence and the assurance with his own heart just resulted in the message and the music. And I'm just going to give you the refrain, but it's He lives, He lives, He lives. Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me, He talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives within my heart. And that particular one, maybe it's also a favorite because I think of it as one of my husband's hallmark hymns, because he could not stop with just one He lives. It would be He lives once again. He lives. He said one more time. He lives. He had to do it 3 times, and so that it's one that when something's going through my mind that I'm thinking about or whatever, that I don't know, nearly every day that'll pop into my mind in some way or another.